Clear.
Hi, this is Misha, and today's video is on Finnish military handguns. We really just have two to talk about, but before we get into those that you just saw us firing, I just thought I'd mention a couple that were in use. And Finland used a lot of different handguns. Obviously, one they used quite a few of was the Russian 1895, the Gaunt. These were left in Finland after the revolution of 1917 and when they declared independence from Russia. So you'll see quite a few of these that were kept in FDF service for quite a long time. In 1919, after World War I, the FDF, the Finnish government, actually purchased quite a few pistols from France. They had a lot of surplus, a lot of leftover, and at that time Finland was buying up whatever they could. And to that end, they bought quite a few of the rubies that France had originally purchased from Spain. France had hundreds of thousands of them, maybe almost as many as 800,000. And they didn't need them, so they were selling them off to whoever wanted to buy. And Finland was definitely a customer because their military was incredibly young at that point, and they needed anything they could get their hands on. You'll also see various Czech and Italian guns in FDS service later on, especially the Beretta model 1934 and 1935. Again, kind of a hodgepodge. Really, the first gun, though, that went into major frontline service and stayed there was the Luger. This is a Finnish military issue Luger here. From the 1920s through the 1930s, Finland would purchase about 8,000 Lugers from WWII in Germany. Now, what happened after World War I? Germany was limited on what arms it could manufacture. And because of the restrictions, they made Lugers in the 7.65 caliber, the 30 caliber, instead of 9mm. Also, the barrels were limited to 4 inches. So when Finland went shopping, they purchased Lugers with those specifications. They would have preferred 9mm, maybe a longer barrel, but they took what they could get. Germany could deliver, so they bought them. The earliest guns came in 1922, and the first order was about 2,000, and they were designated as the Pist.23 or P.23 or sometimes M08. Now that would be the ones in 30 caliber, 7.65 Luger, Parabellum. Well, what would happen, and this one here is in 9mm, these were in frontline service for a long time, and barrels would eventually wear out. So Tikka would make replacement 9mm barrels, and these are 5 inches long as opposed to 4. So when guns would be, used and the barrels would be worn out, sometimes they would either receive 30 caliber Tikka barrels or 9mm during World War II and afterwards. Of the original 8,000, give or take, by 1944 there were fewer than 5,000 still in active use, and the high attrition rate was because the Luger was the frontline issue weapon during the Winter and Continuation Wars. By 1951 there were fewer than 4,000 remaining in FDF inventory. Some were purchased and taken home by soldiers, again attrition, and they were also firing heavy machine gun ammo out of these, and it was frankly just breaking the toggle. The one we shot today worked pretty well. We had a couple of failures to feed, but I'm going to attribute that mostly to using modern ammo. We were using brass-cased S&B. Pretty good stuff, pretty hot-loaded, but not probably exactly what a Luger first made in the 1920s was meant to fire. But yeah, the Luger has a long history in Finland, and it would be kept in frontline service up to the 80s and eventually replaced by the FNBDA. But up until the 80s, they still kept a few thousand in active service. Another change they did, I said it has a 5-inch Tikka barrel. They went to a larger, fatter front sight, and the rear sight, they would open up the notch. Now these changes were done relatively late in service, probably during the Cold War era. And when these were refurbished, they had a Parkerized finish applied. Like most of the Finn Lugers, this one's not matching, but it does appear all correct and everything else. And they did install these black Bakelite grips when the original wood ones wore out. Wood grips in Finland weren't all that great because of the cold and the wet and the snow. They would often swell. But yeah, the Finnish Luger is very interesting, and this one's a fun one to shoot. I picked it up pretty cheap, since it isn't a Nazi German marked one, that they don't go for huge money, which is, if you're looking for an entry-level Luger that definitely saw some military service, maybe a Finn one might be of interest. But I've always kind of wanted one because of the unique Tikka type barrel. But of course the most famous Finnish pistol is the one that was developed inside Finland. This is the VKT, or Valmet, depending on when it was made, L-35 Lahti. It's a very famous pistol to gun collectors, and it's a really neat pistol, and it was a lot of fun to shoot. And it really it fires standard 9x19 Parabellum Luger. It was originally made for either it or 30 caliber Luger for obvious reasons, since the FDF was using both. It first came out in 1929, at least the original prototype did, and was developed by a gentleman named M08, who was made famous by developing the KP-31 submachine gun. And he didn't exactly develop the Lahti pistol on any kind of direct military requirement. It was more of something that was said to him because he already worked for a military arms factory, that it would be nice to have a Finnish pistol. So he came up with this prototype. Really all the guidelines he was given were it needed to be robust, durable, mechanically simple, easy to field strip, and able to penetrate a steel helmet at 50 meters or whatever the distance they needed, at distance. So it didn't take him long to come out with a prototype. It worked quite well, and I think I read it made it over 6,000 rounds without a major failure. And in 1931, he came up with another version, a second round of prototypes that were simplified for mass production. Unfortunately, this round didn't fare as well. It failed during military trials, so in 1935 a third prototype series came out. It did better, but had still some problems, but the Finnish government, the Finnish military, agreed to adopt it in June of that year if the problems could be ironed out. Well, between that time and 1939, several steps happened. First, the pistols were scheduled to go into mass production. They placed an order with VKT for 2,500. Some more problems were discovered. For example, the wooden grips were swelling in the moisture, so they went to this Bakelite style. The original order for 2,500 was canceled. A new order for 7,600 was placed, so on and so forth. There were some production delays. By 1938, the military had about 100 trials pistols, and they were proving pretty good. A few more tweaks were made, a few more simplifications for mass production, and in 1939 they finally started to go into production. But of course, in November of that year, the Winter War started. When the Winter War kicked off, there were very few in frontline FDF service, and by March, when the war ended, about 1,000 had been delivered to the military. So about 1,000 of these pistols were in the Winter War, all told. Now the first group, these were kind of produced in what are called series. The Series 0, or the first series really, was prototype. And there's maybe 100, 150 there. The Series 1, which was the first standard production series, which lasted from 1939 through 1940, consisted of about 2,600 pistols. And they were a little bit different than this one here. This is a Series 4, just so you know, so it's a post-war. But Series 1, we had about 1,000 delivered during the Winter War, with the other 1,600 delivered afterwards. Series 2 took place in 1941 and 1942, and consisted of about 1,000 more. And then Series 3 took place during the Continuation War, and then a little bit afterwards. and it had about 2,000 pistols. So there's that. All told, about 5,500 to 5,600 of these were delivered to the FDF. Their production run and whatnot was cut short because it's a good pistol, but it's big and heavy, and most every part on this is machined steel, so it was pretty labor intensive to create. It wasn't as cheap and durable as they were hoping it would be. It did have some cracking problems. To be fair, most of that was related to the very hot machine gun ammo they were feeding it, so it wasn't entirely the pistol's fault. When the continuation war ended, Finland decided it had enough Lahti pistols, and that was pretty much it. Like I said, they had about 5,500 to 5,600 in FDF service, and that combined with the Lugers that were still in service and other random pistols was enough to equip their officer corps. Well, Valmet, VKT, which became Valmet after the war, had invested quite a bit in the production line, so they decided to do a Series 4 after the war. And this would take place, the years are kind of vague, 1946 through maybe 1952, kind of on and off, but they would make about 2,000 to 2,500 more pistols in the line, and these were mostly for export or commercial sales. Now, the major difference between a Series 3 and a Series 4 is that a Series 4 lacks the lug in the back for a stock. If you look at our Swedish handguns video where you see the Swedish M40, which was a licensed copy of the Lahti pistol, you'll see a stock lug here. And the Series 1 through 3 in FDF service would have that lug, but they didn't do it on the Series 4 because honestly by that point they weren't making shoulder stocks and they never ended up making that many. Also between Series 1 and 3 there were small differences, machining differences and whatnot to the receivers to make it a little easier to make, but there weren't major changes. Now, in the beginning of Series 4, they would have a loaded chamber indicator right here like this one. Late in Series 4, they would also do away with that. So if you see a Finnish Lahti without the loaded chamber indicator, it's probably a Series 4, or it has a replacement slide. But yeah, the Series 4 was the last major run. They would end with serials in around 9,300, and they had begun with serials around 1,000. And there were some other oddballs with 3-digit serials, but it's definitely the case that fewer than 9,000 Lahtis were produced by VKT/Valmet. Interestingly, and this is one of them, about 600 were sent to Israel for the IDF use in the early 1950s. So some of these actually went down to Israel, including the one I'm holding in my hands. At least that's the commonly accepted story. The FDF would keep the Lahti in service. It was designated as the Pist.35, but it was more commonly known as the L-35 for Lahti, model 1935. Hello, gato. Just this, like this, gravity, there we go. Anyway. So the Finnish Lahti. This is an interesting pistol mechanically. Like the rebarreled Finnish Luger, it has a 5-inch barrel. As you've already seen, it has a loaded chamber indicator. Now, even though it looks like a Luger, it operates quite differently. You pull this back. It is a locked breech. One feature it has that's quite unique is it has a bolt accelerator in here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this little flap moves back and forth and kicks the bolt. And the idea there was if it had been frozen due to being in someone's holster in the cold, it would help accelerate the bolt backwards to keep it cycling. So we did that. It feeds from a proprietary, a unique 7-shot magazine, based on the Luger but different. Got this large thumb thing here to take it apart. You can use this to load it. Actually, isn't too bad to load. It's stiff. Fixed sights, very common for the day. The safety's neat. When it's on, you can actually feel it in the web of your hand and then just flick it off, so it's not a bad safety. Disassembly is very easy. There's a catch right here. Once you do that, you just forward. Comes off. This is a very smooth gun. This is your locking system here. This wedge is what locks the gun. So that you can take the bolt out. by removing this like that. Here's your bolt. And there's a wedge here. And that's pretty much it. Hear that? That's machine steel there for you. It's not castings. That's actual machine steel. So yeah, the Finnish L-35 Lahti. We've kind of teased you with it in one of our early videos, but back then we took it out to shoot it and it wasn't working, and I was hoping it was a magazine issue, and as it turns out it was, which makes me very happy. I received this pistol from a friend whose father bought it back when Interarms was importing these years ago. I can usually get this sucker right back together, but of course on camera nothing goes together. There it is. And Interarms did import these briefly back in the 50s, and that's pretty much it. But only 9,000 ever made. They're not a very common gun. Goes together pretty easy. That's the bolt accelerator hitching there, like it should. Single action trigger. These actually have very decent triggers for a military gun. The early prototypes, that was actually one of the problems they were having, was pretty so-so triggers, so they actually revamped the trigger to be a lot better. But I just thought we would share the Finnish guns today, and there's not a large number of them, but they are really interesting and really unique, and the L-35 is as well. Along with the Lugers, these were kept in service through the 80s, and they were making replacement parts for these up through the 70s in Finland. In 1985, Valmet actually made about, I think it was 100 or 500 or whatever commemorative edition ones, and even 50-year commemorative edition L-35s, and that was the last production run of these. Just as a comparison, over 80,000 were made in Sweden as the M40, so a nearly 10-to-1 ratio. Well, anyway, I appreciate you tuning in, and if you have any questions or comments, please post them below, and we'll catch you next time.